Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into the life and crimes of, well, he's one of the most notorious figures in early Australian history, Thomas Jeffrey.
Definitely notorious.
You've provided us with a ton of documents, court records, newspaper clippings, even parts of a book about Australian bushrangers. Should be interesting.
It really is remarkable. These sources, they're more than just a list of crimes, They give us this incredible look into what life as a convict in early 19th century Australia was really like. It's grim how someone could go to such lengths. It makes you think.
Right out of the gate, these documents, they don't sugarcoat anything. Even before he ends up in Australia, Jeffrey's got a record, a long one. Desertion, theft, even hints of, troubling behavior. And this is when he was young.
Troubled is putting it mildly. It's tricky, of course. We can't just slap modern labels onto people from the past. But the sources, they definitely point to someone deeply troubled. One court record, it even talks about how he robbed his own family. That's cold. Betraying the people closest to you, just for what? A bit of personal gain.
It's easy to jump to conclusions, right? Write him off as just a born criminal.
Right.
But there's always more to it, context. That's key.
Absolutely. We can't forget what life was like back then, especially in England. For the poor, desperation wasn't just a word, it was their reality. The sources really drive that point home.
So instead of help, a chance, anything like that, he gets shipped off to Australia. Brutal punishment in itself. You'd think that would be enough to break a person, but if anything, it seems like it did the opposite.
Yeah, transportation wasn't just a change of scenery. Just imagine being ripped away from everything, everyone you know. Shipped across the world to this harsh and unforgiving place. It's all there in the sources, his escapes, the punishments he endured. Brutal. He got to Australia already hardened by life.
This is where it gets, pivotal. He becomes an overseer, can you believe it? A flagellator at the Launceston jail, like something out of a Greek tragedy.
It really is. The punished becoming the punisher. And this is where we get a glimpse into the system's psychological toll. You see, as overseer Jeffrey, he wasn't just following orders, no. He gained a reputation. Excessive cruelty, finding pleasure in inflicting pain. It's disturbing.
So we're talking about a man who knows brutality firsthand, on both ends, really. And then he escapes into the bush, brings a gang with him. That's when things take a turn in the sources, a dark one. It's not just about surviving anymore.
Oh, it's different.
It feels like this escalation, a descent into something much darker.
Exactly. And you can follow that descent, trace it through what's written in those court records and newspaper clippings you've got there. At first, he's just another escaped convict. But then, after that escape, everything changes. He becomes something else entirely. The language changes.
Oh, that's interesting.
He becomes a monster in human shape, a fiend.
Wow.
The words they use, they paint a picture.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of that darkness was fueled by the very system meant to punish him. It's like, did his experiences, both as convict and overseer, push him further?
It's a question historians still debate. Did the system create the monster or simply, unleash it? These sources, they don't give us a clear-cut answer, but they do offer a glimpse into this brutal period, how people were shaped, or maybe warped is a better word, by their world.
It's chilling. And then there's that crime, the one that solidifies his gruesome reputation, the murder of that infant, John Tibbs. It's one thing to read about robberies, shootouts, but this is different.
Absolutely. It reminds us of just how vulnerable settlers were in the bush. The mother's testimony, it's included in these sources, and it's harrowing. She describes being completely helpless at Jeffrey's mercy.
It's hard to even imagine.
This wasn't about rebellion or even just taking what he needed. It was cruel, calculated. It sent shockwaves through the colony.
As you read her account, it's like, you can practically feel the fear. She describes him holding a gun to her baby's head, and then later, his words, so cold. I sent it to Mr. Barnard's. What do we make of that?
Chilling. Some historians think he was trying to shift blame, even faced with such a horrific act. Others, they see it as a sign of someone completely unhinged, detached from the reality of his crimes.
Both are pretty disturbing, but there's another layer to this, isn't there? The sources, they condemn him, of course, but there's this undercurrent of, fascination with his brutality.
That's a good point. Even as they called him a monster, the newspapers. They printed every gruesome detail. They fed the public's horror, but also their curiosity. It's like the way they framed his crimes, it all added to this image of Jeffrey as this almost legendary figure of evil.
Like a gruesome penny dreadful. And those stories, even the horrific ones, they served a purpose, didn't they? I mean, they offered a glimpse into the darkest parts of human nature, but also maybe a strange kind of comfort, a reminder that even in the untamed bush, there was still a line. And Jeffrey, he crossed it. Even with this monster label attached to him, the sources, they still show someone driven by something like, oh, desperation. It's like he's always running after the Tibbs murder, splits from his gang even, trying to outrun himself maybe.
Maybe. You're right. It's like he understands, the weight of what he did, but he can't break free. It's a cycle of violence, and he's trapped. The sources, they really paint this picture of a man just spiraling further down.
And then there's that detail, that one detail in the sources that's hard to stomach. The cannibalism. Reading about violence is one thing, but these accounts, they're so specific, it's chilling.
Yeah. The story of Russell's murder, then Jeffrey and Perry, what they did afterward, eating his flesh. It makes you question, well, everything. It makes you face this really dark side of humanity.
One newspaper article you included, it really goes for the throat, doesn't it? Calls Jeffrey and Perry devils in human guise, like eating human flesh is just another Tuesday.
And that's what makes this so much more than just some gruesome story. It shows how people struggled to understand something so outside their reality. How do you reconcile that kind of savagery with the fact that these were men, driven by things we can at least try to grasp?
It's like searching for a sliver of humanity in the darkest place imaginable. Was it purely survival, like some historians say, or was it something else, something more? Especially when you consider how they tried to hide the flesh.
It's a question that won't go away, will it?
Sure.
Horrifying, but fascinating too. And it gets even more complicated when you see how these events were twisted over time. That book on bushrangers you have there, written years later, it goes even further than the original stories.
It's like the legend of Thomas Jeffrey. It took on a life of its own, didn't it? Became something bigger. The book, it makes him out to be this almost mythical figure of evil, worse than he was when he was alive even. Why do you think that is?
It reminds us that history, it's not set in stone. The way we tell stories, especially the dark ones, it changes over time. Our own anxieties, our need to make sense of the past, maybe even just our love for a good story, it all plays a part.
So where does that leave us then? We've gone deep into Thomas Jeffrey's life, his crimes, explored the brutality of his time. We've even looked into the darkest corners of what it means to be human. What's the takeaway from this whole deep dive?
It's a powerful reminder that history, it's not just dates and names, it's us. It's about understanding what shapes people, the choices they make, and how stories, even the most disturbing ones, they stick with us. They capture something in our minds.
We started with a pile of old documents, and look where we ended up. A story that's both horrifying and, deeply human. We've seen how poverty, how brutality, how it can turn a man into, a figure of fear and fascination. It's a story that stays with you, makes you think about the uncomfortable truths of the past, maybe even about yourself. And on that note, I'll leave you with this. Was Thomas Jeffrey just a product of his time? A monster wearing a human face? Or maybe, just maybe, a chilling reminder of the darkness we all carry inside us?